I'd like to introduce Dr. John Pedicone, who is a senior faculty fellow here at the University of Arizona, also the vice president of the Southern Arizona Leadership Council, and he was, prior to that, the superintendent in the Flowing Wells School District here in Tucson. So, to start us off, please tell us a little bit about the school district, Flowing Wells, and then also how you came to be superintendent.
Okay, sure. Well, Flowing Wells School District is located on the north side of Tucson, Arizona. And if you were to, we always used to affectionately say that I-10 is the spine of the district, and it goes from Grant Road on the south all the way to Ina Road on the north, and again with I-10 being right in the center. And primarily a low-income to moderate-income community, just wonderful families as far as I'm concerned, but they have a lot of issues of urban school districts. It was a district that at one time had been rural and then was captured as Tucson grew by population and has become an urban school district. So it has a wonderful place with a great culture, and in fact, one of the things that Flowing Wells attempts to cultivate is the idea that people may live in Tucson. When you ask them where they live, we want them to say that they live in Flowing Wells, because there's still that sense of a kind of a small town community that's encouraged by the district. Great district, 8 schools, really now there are 10 counting alternative schools. All the schools have been recognized as A+ schools in the state of Arizona, and all but one is a blue ribbon school as well. So in spite of the fact that that was kind of what defined us as an organization, in spite of the fact that we've got a lot of those issues that would seem to lead to lack of achievement and accomplishment, Flowing Wells was different, and they take pride in the fact that the mission is very clear. Regardless of where kids come from, when they come to Flowing Wells School District, they get the best education they can. So I was really very fortunate. Now I got there, I finished a doctorate in the Midwest, looked for areas to locate in to take my first administrative job. I was on sabbatical, as many of the students maybe who would be looking for a superintendency might have experienced. And so I went back off the sabbatical after finishing a doctorate in Wisconsin and looked for places that we might want to raise our family. And one of the places we thought about was Arizona. So I'd heard about this little district because the superintendent at that time was the president of Phi Delta Kappa, which to me made some sense. You look for a place where you see successful leadership, and more than likely the district that this person's in had to be pretty good. So I applied at Little Flowing Wells School District, never knew anything about it before I applied for it, and then applied in a couple of other places. Well, I got a call from the then soon-to-be superintendent, who was then the associate superintendent, and I made it to the final 4 candidates to go to an interview in Tucson. So I did, and make a long story short, I got my first job as assistant principal at the junior high in Flowing Wells. At that time, there and still is 1 junior high, 1 high school, 6 elementary schools, and now, as I mentioned, a couple of alternative schools. So I did that for a year, and then the following year was promoted to high school principal. I just had a great experience as a high school principal in that district. We brought the school to A+. In those days, they rated schools 1 through 10 when you made it to the A+ ranks. I'm not sure if you were in the state when they did that.
Yes.
But here's a little Flowing Wells School District that had all these things that reputation for being a good school, but I'm not so sure that people believed that they were as good as they could be. And we go to that recognition ceremony, and what they would start with the 10th school, 9th school, 8th school, and we're sitting there, and I brought a bunch of the old guard with me and some new teachers and some support staff, and we're just celebrating because we've been selected for this honor. And as they went through each school, they get to the 6th school, and I'm thinking, geez, God, we're 5, 5 out of 10, and they get to the 4th school, and I start looking at the piece of paper to be sure that I really had the right day. Did they really select us for this thing? Anyway, we made it to the number 1. We were identified at that time as the number 1 high school in Arizona, which I can't tell you what that meant for our community. Kids seemed to step up a little higher. The community began to believe that, what, this is a pretty cool place. And so, anyway, I did that for 4 years. We went on to win the U.S. Blue Ribbon. And the following year, my 6th year in the district, I was promoted to assistant superintendent. Did that for several years, and then finally superintendent. So that's a long answer to a short question about how I got to the superintendency, and spent just a wonderful 6.5 years as superintendent of the district before I retired.
Wonderful. Perfect, though, to illustrate, because there are many who move to the superintendency on a very similar career path. So I think that's a good illustration here of how we find any number of our superintendents, and particularly the high school principal to assistant superintendent to superintendent. It just makes it interesting.
I would, if you would have asked me, Dr. McConey, whether or not I would have thought I'd be in the same district for all of my administrative experience, really, well, my whole career was in the same district, I really would have said no, because I was brought up in an environment where you're taught that you're going to be moving from one place to another. And it was, it was just providence as far as I'm concerned, and very, very fortunate that, for me anyway, that I landed in a place where you could do school and where I found this great community with people that really did care about education, and it turned out to be my own. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, well, it is perfect. It is.
Very fortunate.
So with those years as superintendent, describe for us what you see as the critical roles and functions for a superintendent. What are those things that change perhaps from an associate superintendency to a superintendency, but what are those critical roles and functions?
Well, it's just like going from an assistant principalship to a principalship. Certainly when you're in charge and you're entrusted with the responsibility of making sure that things happen the way they need to, it's very, very different than being an assistant and being any other position. So for me, the superintendency is like that. You really are entrusted to help to create the environment that works for all kids and for all faculty, employees in the community. So for me, the superintendency is more about building culture and helping to work with others to create a vision that's sustained and that makes an organization successful. So you do that in a variety of different ways. I've always believed that leadership is trust and relationship is extremely important. So I happen to be in a district with 6,000 kids. If it were a district with 60,000, I would see it no differently. You just figure out other ways to be sure that you create intimacy among and between the people that you're working with, and so I think that's one of the primary roles of the superintendent. Obviously, the kinds of technical stuff that have to take place are your responsibility as well. So you've got to keep the organization fiscally responsible. You have to be sure that you have a strong curriculum in place. You have to be sure, and that was one of the things I think Flowing Wells did well, and that's work on instruction. We have exquisite staff development. You hire people that you believe are the best. They're the best at the moment that you hire them, and you help to make them better. Whether it be a support staff person or a teacher, training is extremely important. So I think that's a critical role as well. But overall, I think you set the tone and you set the values. You help to set the values for what goes on in an organization. I believe vision takes place together, but culture and climate creation is your responsibility as a school leader.
It seems that district culture plays a huge part in how the district is able to move forward in terms of being high performing versus being okay. Mm-hmm. I guess it's the whole good to great scenario. Sure. So knowing that and knowing that you have this obligation to keep your board and your administrative staff and your teachers all focused on that core mission of instruction, mm-hmm. and knowing how important how do you do that? What are the strategies that move everyone to say that's why we're here and that's sure. what this is about?
Sure. Well, for me, it starts with people really understanding what the values are for that organization. I mean, you ask people if they believe that instruction is important, and by and large, they will tell you yes. It's kind of like asking a politician, is education important? And you'll always see on every one of their platforms that, they'll say, oh yeah, I believe that education is number one. Then you got to drill down a little deeper about what they mean by that, So in a school organization, I think you're helping to create with others the values about what your organization is about. So if you know what you're about and you set up what those values and you have core values that are clearly expressed, then it makes it easier to vet decisions through that set of core values, and you begin to make the right kinds of decisions. So when you start talking about remaining focused on instruction, on education, on academic achievement, that means that we all understand that we're in this together. That this work that we do in schools is hard work. I don't know of very many people in organizations that I've been associated with that don't work hard. So if you can't work much harder than you're working, and one might argue you can always work harder, but I would argue that I see people working about as hard as you should be expecting them to work, and there's still more to do, then you've got to figure out how to make what you do more efficient. You've got to figure out, as a leader, how you can give people the tools to be able to get the job done effectively. So that means creating efficiency in the sense that these are the things that are most important to us, these are the things that we're going to focus on, and not that we're going to abandon other things that are important, but we know what we're about and we can move in that direction. The other thing I mentioned earlier is that leadership is trust and relationships important. Mm-hmm. Then I've got to I have to create an environment where people believe that I would always do what I believe is in their best interest. If I make a mistake, I used to say, all I ask for is the moment. You give me this moment when a decision comes down and suddenly you're uncomfortable with the decision, or you hear about something that doesn't seem to make sense, and your reaction is, that doesn't seem to align with the way Pedicone makes decisions, the way we make decisions. That's the moment that I ask you to stop for a second and give us the moment to get the right answer. Come to the source and find out why the decision was made, and if you were not a part of the decision, hopefully you would have all the opportunities to be if it's a critical decision. But if you weren't, then take the moment to find out why the decision was made. And then, you know what, maybe it'll make some sense, or if it doesn't, if we made a mistake, I can promise you we'll accept that and admit it, and then try not to make the mistake again. But that's what I believe, that's what loyalty to each other and what trust means, that we don't always make perfect decisions, and we're not always perfect in the organization, but you can always trust that we're doing this thing together, and that the person that's in charge of making those decisions is making them for the right reasons. So that's...
That really speaks to what you said earlier when you said, we're at a district of 6,000 or we're at a district of 60. I would not see it any differently. And so those are the kinds of things that really, they go across any layers of size
Absolutely.
or type or anything else. You're still looking for that relationship between the central administration, you
Sure.
as the superintendent and the board, and that teacher who's teaching third grade at the elementary school, or
Sure.
whoever's questioning
Sure,
your
that's
decision.
right. Well, and not that it isn't harder when you're larger. I mean, it's like anything else. I mean, you know that it's
Yeah.
it's
But
easier.
the issues are the same.
It's easier when I have 6,000 kids and I have 10 schools, because I can get around to those 10 schools in a day. When I have 100 schools, I'm not going to get to them in one day. But that just means I've got to figure out other mechanisms to be sure that people understand that the person who is making those decisions at a central level cares enough about them to figure out ways to make sure that happens.
Thinking about the other departments in the school district, and this is the part where I see a lot of young novice, I should say, superintendents struggle, because you have finance and you have transportation and you have food service and you have all those, I guess you want to say, maybe we want to say business or support functions.
Sure.
But they're essential, obviously. None of us are going to run the school district without those things. So how do those structures become a part of that value system, that culture, that focus on it? So how does that all come about?
Yeah, well, for me, it goes back to, again, your belief system, and that's that you can't run an organization without a strong sense of community. So all of those functions are extremely important. So, I mean, to me, the leaders in those organizations, for example, the maintenance director and the transportation director and special ed director and all those other functions are part of your administrative team in a real sense. So you never do things without them. I mean, you occasionally have to have meetings with principals, certainly, but when you have administrative team meetings, they are part of that organizational team in every respect. You find out as much as possible what's going on in those areas by being present. You know, the other part of the role of the superintendency is visibility, and it's being in schools and it's being in organizations. So I used to like to ride the bus once or twice a year. You know, you get on there and you find out what the routes feel like. And in fact, our new teacher orientation included something from every one of those directors. They would come in, they'd talk about what their roles were like. What is it, you know, when you ask for a bus, what does it mean and what does it feel like? When you have maintenance issues, what's that maintenance director, and he would actually teach a component of our staff development program, because we believed that everybody in the organization was a teacher. And so you get that sense of everybody feeling like they're a part of it. When we'd have testing times, you know, during the course of the year, those folks are figuring out ways to make the test assessment experience more effective and more successful for kids. So whether it's putting something on the bus on the days when testing takes place, where the bus drivers say congratulations on another day of testing, you know, we're looking forward to helping you in any way we can, or celebrate the end of the day when they finish the assessment experience. Whatever that is, where everybody feels like they're a part of the success of those kids, you do it. Maintenance directors and you know, the men and women that mow the lawns. No, they don't mow the lawn in front of the schools during testing times. You know, all those
Yeah.
kinds of things where you're giving credence to their role in the effectiveness of what goes on in the organization by honoring what they do, and then
telling them why they matter.
and
really.
why it matters. That's
Yeah.
that's so. I mean, it isn't any one thing. It's a collection of things that all focus on the same belief, and that's that everybody is important. It's not Pollyanna. You know, earlier we were talking about large and small.
Yeah.
Well, if size were the only issue, then you'd find no districts that are large that are good. I can show you large districts that are amazing organizations. I can also show you smaller districts that aren't.
Yes.
So it's more than that. It's what you put your value on, how you communicate that in every single moment of truth, where you have an opportunity to demonstrate that you're serious about what you talk about. So I think that's what the superintendent does.
That really makes it clear, because I think that for many times for the novice superintendents, they struggle with where should they be.
Yeah.
And really, in essence to that, your answer was just about everywhere, but at different times,
Sure.
and connecting it in different ways. But
Sure.
that really is the piece.
You also, I know, you also have to have a board that understands that.
Yes.
Because as maybe we'll talk about, but certainly you know, that boards can make or break your ability in many ways to be able to do your job effectively. If a board understands how to be a board, it makes your job of a superintendent possible. If they don't, it just becomes this tremendous impediment. So I say that as I'm thinking through being all in as many places as possible, and knowing that your job is to be visible and on site. If a board member calls and you're not there, it isn't a matter of them being inconvenienced, it's a matter of them saying, good. That means the guy or man or woman's out there doing their job. So you have to have a board that recognizes that that's what you should be doing, not sitting in your office 100% of the time, but actually being out there with the people that are important.
As I've talked to not just novice superintendents, actually, many superintendents, and they talk about the factors that are outside of their let's say, organizational or administrative work that create the greatest challenge for them. They often talk about that board superintendent relationship and say, well, I would be in classrooms, or I would be here, or I would do this if I didn't have to.
Sure.
Such and such with the board, or this with the board. And so knowing that the board's as much a part of that system as you are,
Sure.
or the principals are, how do you work that relationship?
Sure. Well, first of all, if you really believe in public schools and the way in which public schools are organized, school boards are not only a part of the organizational structure of school districts, but they're an important and critical aspect of it, because they're the parents, in many cases, the community members that represent the community that you're serving. So if boards are trained properly, and if they really understand the role that they play, then it shouldn't be a conflicting relationship at all. In fact, it ought to be a very reasonable and cooperative, collaborative relationship between governance that sets policy and laws, and the superintendent and staff that implement it. So to me, it's like anything else. Again, it goes back to the belief that we have, I think, as leadership being relational. So every single board member and I have a unique relationship. I have some basic tenets that I believe I follow with the board as a whole, that I don't let one board member know something that the other board members don't know. The only exception to that is the president in many cases, because the president and I will have a unique relationship and a unique understanding. In the district that I came from, the president's role shifted. It switched every year or two. They would elect a new member to be president so that everybody had the opportunity to lead in that regard. Board members and I, if I found that there was a volatile issue, I can discuss that issue with each board member individually, let them know what the facts are, and then it makes those meetings that take place when they're all together much more meaningful and much more effective. So I think that's how you do it. You have a clear understanding together, and that means I've got to spend time with each board member individually and as a body to be sure that we're all on the same page.
That is probably the single most common question that I get as we work with novice superintendents, as I bring in even experienced superintendents to work with them. That seems to be where the conversation goes. Sure. Immediately, every time. If you were mentoring someone who's sitting out there maybe watching this and saying, I'd like to be a superintendent someday, what experiences would you absolutely insist that they have, and what kinds of things would you say to them, you really need to know about these things?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think generally, as you suggested earlier, most superintendents come, although there are non-traditional superintendents as well, but most come from within the ranks of teacher administrator. So they get a sense of what a lot of those things are that are important in the operation of a school and then ultimately a school district. Certainly you may not be a finance expert, but you have to have a sense of budget. Your responsibility is to make sure that the district runs well, and you have a responsibility toward fiscal accountability. And so you've got to understand how that works, and again, focus on hiring the right people in the area where you may or may not have strengths or weaknesses. So certainly fiscal accountability, finance is really important. law is extremely important. I mean, when you're in that position, while you may have counsel from a lot of different places, you really have to have a sense of what legal issues are and how you keep your district moving in the right direction.
So you at least know when to say, uh-oh, better pay attention.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And most of us have a sense of that. I consistently worked at that throughout my career to be sure that I really understand and any time a new legal issue came forward, any kind of legislation came forward, I wanted to be sure that I was really well versed, and you can use your state association for that, and I felt it was my own personal responsibility to investigate that as well. And you know that you can be tenant. There are those that would argue with me without having a pretty strong sense of curriculum and instruction. It's really what should be driving school districts anyway. It's certainly in this day and age where assessment has taken on a much, much different role in public schools. You better have a good idea of what instruction looks like. I mean, I'm a strong believer that principals have to be visible, and they're the instructional leaders in schools, but you have to be sure that you're helping those leaders become better instructional leaders. So you have to know what that means and what that's about. So again, you hire great people around you that will work with you to make sure that those aspects are taken care of, but you've got to have a sense of it. When you talk, many people have been in preparation programs where someone's talked about what it is to be an effective principal, and I'm sure that people have heard, well, you need to walk around, you need to be in classrooms a lot. I would argue that that's true, but you got to know what you're looking for when you walk in those classrooms. It's not enough to simply be visible. It's really important to be visible and meaningful. So I think the same thing is true of a superintendent who she understands or he understands what to look for when they walk into a school. I used to ask principals, trust that when I walk into your school, I would hope that you feel like it's a gift. Yeah, it's the gift that keeps on giving, but when I walk in, I want you to know that I'm going to look for things that you're so close to the situation you might miss. So if I see things that, whether they're physical or educational, that I might be able to help you with, I'll do it in a way that's respectful, that honors your position, but give me an opportunity to give you another insight. But I've got to have a way of, kind of knowledgeable way of bringing that forward. Yeah. So I've got to have. So I would say law, finance, curriculum. Those are the three areas that come to mind when you ask that question.
A question that comes up frequently with as I speak with people is the issue of balance in their lives. And I recently had a second-year superintendent say to me, I thought that as a principal I was pretty much working 24/7. And now that I'm a superintendent, I feel like I'm working 48/7. And my family is suffering. I have young children. And so what would you advise a person about that balance? And anything that you could tell them about that would be helpful.
Well, we get into these jobs for a lot of reasons. I mean, and we sometimes you can fall in love with the organization you're in at the exclusion of the people that you technically, heartfelt ways care about the most. That's your family and the people that you're doing all this for. In effect, it happened to me as a high school principal. I mean, I got consumed with being a high school principal. I loved it. I wasn't sure if I was doing what was right. I just knew it was a lot of fun. And so all of a sudden you start realizing that you're not spending as much time with your wife, or you're not spending as much time with your kids at the only moments that they're going to have to do what they're doing the first time. So you miss those first times. When I have folks in class, aspiring principals or aspiring superintendents, I always tell them, don't you dare make me an accomplice to your missing something that's the only time your kid is going to do it. If it happens to be on a night when classes are run, if you tell me that there's something that your child is going to experience once and you need to be there, I promise you'll get licensed to be there. But don't not tell me about it so that I become part of the problem. So you know what I mean. So you simply got to figure out how to do that. I mean, the best administrators I've seen have been the ones that have involved their families and their kids in their work, so that when they come to events, they bring their kids with them. When there's going to be times when your child is doing something and you have to be present. Well, you got to make those decisions. But by and large, the organization should understand that when you say, I've got to be with my child or my family, they'll understand that. Yeah. You also have an obligation not to do that when it isn't critically important, obviously. But I really think that there's a way to be sure that you involve your family in your work and your work with your family. I mean, it works out that way. Quite honestly, when you're a superintendent, you have such high visibility. You're so much a part of the community. Even if you don't live in the one that you work in, which was my situation, you bring that community to your family and vice versa. You can do that.
So in a way, that understanding of one's family and those relationships kind of becomes a part of the district culture.
I think that's right.
Because you really do that for all your employees. It's not just about you as the superintendent
right.
or your principals as principals, but it's about everybody. And
That's
so
right. And
that's
they-
kind of how you help do it.
That's really good. Yeah, they understand then by the way you operate that they can operate that way as
Yeah.
well. And it doesn't mean that people abuse that. It's like anything else. They know that you hire people who want to do their job well. Like I said, you create the culture around the fact that when they do it well, they feel this reward as a part of an organization that's effective, and then nobody wants to abuse that. And so giving them license to be human is the least that you do with
Yeah.
others, you know, so
Yeah.
it makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense.
Yeah. So now you've been away from the superintendency for a little while. You've had an opportunity to kind of reflect, and then again, and in your case, teach other people how to be
Sure.
prepared. Do you see any differences between when you were superintendent and the superintendency now? And if so, is there a trend that you see, or something that students would be interested in knowing?
Sure. Well, and we really didn't mention a little bit earlier in one of the other questions, when you talk about critical attributes, you know, certainly a couple that we didn't mention deal with the media and understanding how to communicate to the community at large what your organization is doing well as openly admitting when things do not go well. You know, the issue of being honest with all parties with regard to your organization is extremely important. So we didn't talk a lot about that, but that also deals with the political realm that you simply have to walk around, and that's the dance that you engage in when you are a school leader, especially a superintendent or a principal. So learning how to deal with the media, learning how to take positions and make decisions, sometimes when they're not popular, but with a level of integrity that allows you to be honest with the media, to not hold things back, to accept the fact that you're going to make some mistakes and have them feel as though this is a person that they can believe, is a trust that pays off in dividends. And I think the same is true in other political arenas where you're dealing with very, very hard decisions. If the community believes that you're doing things for the right reason, they'll trust that the same thing that employees will trust in others, that when you make a decision, it's really in their best interest. I can remember many times in the district that I was in, Flowing Wells, where, again, it was, as I mentioned, a relatively moderate to low income community by and large, that they trusted the school to take care of them. And I remember hard decisions where other agencies would come in, or they would feel like there was some political storm that was coming out of that little community, and they would go to the school and say, we trust that you're going to take care of us. You're the advocate. Yeah. So that kind of a trust, a human trust, is really, really important, and one that you simply take very seriously. You don't break. So now, looking at the difference today from the one, this is going back 4 years ago when I was superintendent, to today, I think there's no question that politically it's much more difficult. I think it's difficult in the sense that things are much more visible today than they ever were. It's kind of like most, not only government entities, but most institutions. Somebody's looking in ways that they didn't always look in before. So you're exposed to a lot of the criticism, and also you have an opportunity then, I think, with that exposure, to be able to tell your story in ways that you maybe couldn't before. So it's important to me to have a strong relationship with the local reporters. You got to know that if they want to get a response to some difficult educational issue, you want them to call you as one of the first people, because they trust what you're going to say is going to be honest. I think that is more difficult today than it was even a few years ago. The whole assessment agenda that says we're redefining the role of school administrators and school leaders. It's really important that you understand what the rules of the game are in terms of state and national assessment. And then you've got to be able to, with laser focus, be able to identify where you have to work to try to improve achievement, so that not only are kids getting what they need, but also your district is being, it remains in a position where they're not suffering from the assessment agenda. So I used to call it with our folks, when a lot of the assessment agenda first came into play, and you saw a lot of pressure from government on schools, from the business community saying they want certain things. And we would get in and talk about what are the rules of the game. And I would say to them, look, we're not going to lose our minds. We're going to do what's right for kids. And so you talk about that, you make sure that you identify what that means. You protect your district from making bad decisions in the face of the enormous pressure that comes from political entities about making sure that you achieve and achieve effectively. But at the same time, you make sure that everybody in the organization understands that you're going to do what's right. So I think it's understanding how that assessment agenda plays out, making sure that you're honest, you're keeping the wolf from the door in some respects, but at the same time, you're making sure that you're doing what needs to be done so that every kid can be successful. I think that's more difficult today than it was even a few years ago.
Okay. That's what I hear, and I
Yeah,
even hear
I
it
think
since
so.
I left the superintendency
Yeah.
a few years ago. Any closing words, parting words of advice?
Well, just that, there's no greater position than a leadership position as far as I'm concerned. And I love the principalship. I really enjoyed working with a staff. You have all those things that you reinforce and that reinforce you as a school person when you have your own school. Suddenly when you move from a principalship to a district level, now all of a sudden that same level of intimacy with people is in jeopardy, because you can very easily, unless you watch yourself, find yourself disjointed and disconnected
Yes,
from the very
yes.
people you care about. So to me, it's understand that you're the person that makes the difference as a leader. Take advantage of the opportunity you have. Never complain. As far as I used to listen to fellow superintendents complain about being a superintendent. I'd say, take your jacket off, show me the twist marks on your shoulder where someone forced you into this job. In Arizona, 226 of us have the honor of being school leaders at a district level. Take advantage of it, do the best you can, enjoy it, really celebrate the fact that you have an opportunity to do wonderful and magnificent things as a school leader, and then go about the business of doing it. So I think it's just great. People that are looking to get into the superintendency, don't be discouraged. Do it well, get as much help as you can, and enjoy the ride.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Sure, it's a pleasure.
Thank you, Deborah.